Iowa State wide receiver Jayden Higgins is one of the biggest risers in the NFL draft process. But should you be buying him in your dynasty leagues? We'll debate next.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Magdziuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $250 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. You can also read me on the 33rd team. And joining me today, as always, is Kate Magdziuk. You've seen her at Pro Football Focus, Yahoo, a million different other places. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Magdziuk. And on today's show, we're talking about wide receiver Jayden Higgins, who has seen his consensus ranking basically rise up every single week throughout this draft process. Okay, I like to track this stuff just to kind of see where these players are going. So on October 1st, his overall consensus ranking was 195. Okay. As of yesterday, his ranking right now is 45th. So that is a pretty steady rise up the consensus board. And if you're looking at the chart, it's just going straight up. But what did you see from his tape when you watched it?
Jayden Higgins is a very interesting prospect. Now, let's just start with the basics here. He's 22 years old, former two-star recruit. He's 6'4", 214 pounds. He is lengthy. He's got both the height and the gigantic wingspan. He's got these long arms. He's big-bodied, and he's got these ball skills that make him, I think, truly exciting when you think about him as a potential sort of possession receiver at the next level. And that's how I project him moving forward, which, I mean, Marcus, let's be real. We're in the age of full PPR trendy leagues, right? So like when we hear possession receiver, that could be really exciting because possession receiver usually means volume. I think he's got outstanding body control and hands that make him a guy that, like, yeah, when I want to move the chains, Jayden Higgins is a guy I want to look for.
Okay, so this is going to be a really nuanced conversation with Jayden Higgins because
I think it will be, yes.
Let's talk about some of the strengths and weaknesses before we get into the fit. So here are just some of my notes that I have on Kate. He is a prototypical possession wide receiver with a long, angular frame. I think he's a pretty good route runner for somebody being that big. I think he does a good job of beating press coverage. He's pretty, he just gets open a lot. And now some of that's Iowa State's offense, but he does a fantastic job of catching the ball outside of his frame. You see him in the red zone. I mean, he is really good at using his body to box out defenders. He's a big receiver that plays big. And that's really good because a lot of times you get these guys that are 6'3", 220 that want to play like they're 5'10", 190. That's not him. He actually plays big. He's got outstanding body control. And you look at the athleticism, Kate, it's very, very good for a player of his size. 6'0", 214, ran a 4.47 40-yard dash, which is more than fine. 39-inch vertical, 128-inch broad. I mean, all of the numbers for a player of his size are fantastic. There's a lot to like. He's checking a lot of boxes. But what about the negatives here?
Let's talk about those negatives. So when you think about the athletic nature of his game, you mentioned all the testing. Despite all of that athleticism, he is not a threat after the catch. He's going to be one of these guys that you're going to want him to win in contested catch scenarios. He's going to win a lot of those contested catch scenarios, but he's more of the guy that's going to make that tough catch and then probably fall after or, kind of stop in the middle of his tracks. Doesn't always have like the loosest hips. And then there's the question, like, he's this possession receiver. How dynamic is he at the next level? Or is he more of the power slot that you're going to want to get up against these linebackers? Now, that's not to say the power slot is a bad thing, but it can make you more scheme dependent, and that can be a tricky thing to navigate.
So let's discuss this because I think this is very important. I think from a fantasy and dynasty perspective, Kate, we want him to be a power slot receiver because it's just easier to get him targets, right? Like the quarterback
You
is
hear power slot, you think volume.
You're thinking volume, right? And it's just easier for a quarterback to get the ball to a slot receiver than it is as an X receiver. But you would think with somebody with his size, 6'4", 220 or 215, that is an outside X receiver. But when I watch his tape, like I don't see an X receiver at all. Like you mentioned the tight hips. I think there's parts. We don't do comps early in the show, but I'm going to give you a comp for him, right? My comp for him is like early career Allen Robinson. Now, Robinson ran a 4.60 40-yard dash, but was extremely explosive. Jacksonville used Allen Robinson as this outside receiver, and he just didn't ever create any separation because he didn't have the flexibility in his lower body to start and stop quickly, right? But when they moved him into the slot, like later in his career, that's when you started to see the volume and him become a better player. I just wonder what the NFL is going to think about having him as a slot. Where do you draft a power slot receiver compared to an outside X receiver? I don't know, but it seems like the NFL likes him quite a bit.
And I think that's where the scheme question comes in, because if you're in an offense that's going to utilize a slot receiver heavily, that's great. Like I look at the Pittsburgh Steelers, right, who have never been a slot heavy team. They don't throw over the middle of the field a lot. Like that would be I think a fairly disastrous landing spot. But if you actually go to a team that utilizes the slot receiver frequently, we don't necessarily know. Let's say the Rams, for instance, right? We don't necessarily know what the usage for, Devontae Adams is going to be. Are they going to primarily utilize him as a boundary receiver? Are they going to utilize him more out of the slot like we saw the Jets do this past season? We don't really know yet. But if the answer is that they're going to put Devontae Adams on the boundary, I look at Jayden Higgins as a guy that could absolutely eat in a Los Angeles Rams offense. That could be like an intriguing, landing spot. But then again, you need to find an offense that's capable of designing touches for some of these, power slot guys. But it's definitely going to change, I think, how teams are prioritizing him based on their coaching staff and based on their offensive scheme.
Well, let me give you another fit. Like the Chargers are looking for receivers, right? They have Lad McConkey. I could see them talking themselves into Jayden Higgins in the first round, being like, hey, 6'4", 220, this guy can run down the field. He'll be our outside receiver. And in theory, that makes sense with Justin Herbert. But I think from a dynasty perspective, we don't love that, right? Because it's just not a spot where he's going to get a lot of basically layup targets and touches because they have Lad McConkey, right? So that is a situation where Higgins gets drafted high, but it's bad for his fantasy value. I would almost prefer he fall to the middle part of the second round and get into a situation where he can be a power slot receiver. I think that's better for his long-term outlook because I just don't see a player, and this is what basically my full evaluation comes down to. I don't see a player that does well in man-to-man coverage on the outside. I don't think he creates any separation. And if everything is going to be contested in the NFL, quarterbacks are going to shy away from throwing to that type of player. Whereas if you're in the slot, you're going to be matched up a lot in zones or linebacker safeties. I just think it's way more advantageous for Higgins playing in the slot than on the outside.
Yeah. And I think, again, when you hear some of maybe the testing numbers, you would think that naturally on the outside, he would be able to create some more of that separation. But it doesn't really, I think the numbers are fairly, maybe deceiving is the wrong word, but I don't think he necessarily plays up to those numbers all the time on the tape. And I think a big part of that is like when it shows up when he's on the boundary and you don't see that natural separation. But again, this is one of the players that I'm looking at in this draft class and saying, okay, his range of outcomes is so wide, just depending on landing spot, that he's a really hard projection to make.
All right, let's take a look at what some of the analytics say about Jayden Higgins and his college profile and what he projects as in the NFL. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Chewy. You've probably heard of Chewy. They really do have everything you need to keep your pet happy and healthy. Whether you're shopping for food, treats, or even pet healthcare, Chewy makes it fast, easy, and affordable. And with over 100,000 products from all of your favorite brands, Chewy has everything your pet needs, from food to treats to toys to beds and grooming. And it's not just for dogs and cats. They've got supplies for birds, fish, reptiles, and small pets too. Chewy also makes it easy to manage your pet's health with prescriptions, telehealth visits, and even in-person vet clinics rolling out nationwide. An auto ship is a game changer. You can set up automatic deliveries for food, treats, or any of your essentials so that you never run out, and you can easily cancel or change at any time. I love how fast our Chewy orders arrive. We also got them set up on the auto ship, so we don't ever have to worry about it. My dog is always happy when the box is dropped off. Chewy has everything you need to keep your pet happy and healthy. Right now, you can save $20 on your first order and get free shipping by going to chewy.com or clicking the link in the description. Save $20 on your first order with free shipping by clicking the link in the description. Minimum purchase required. New customers only. Terms and conditions apply. See site for complete details. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Every dayers on Wednesday's show, Matt Williamson will be here to answer your Twitter questions. So make sure you send them into us at Marcus_Mosher, at Kate Magdziuk. Okay, let's talk about some of the analytics here with Jayden Higgins. What do we got?
Let's first take a look at some of the advanced metrics. Let's take a look at the stats. Let's take a look at, just all of the numbers we have here for Jayden Higgins. We do have, a decent set of stats here, back-to-back seasons at Iowa with 980 plus receiving yards. Best season by far came as a senior, 87 catches, 1,183 receiving yards, 9 touchdowns. And I mean, absolutely dominant in the Big 12. Played 2 seasons prior to transferring to Iowa State at Eastern Kentucky, had over those 2 seasons, just over 1,100 receiving yards, 13 touchdown receptions, broke out as a as a sophomore. And then once we saw him go to that Iowa State, a bigger program, still succeeded in terms of that production profile. 76th percentile college dominator rating per player profiler, 86th percentile college target share, 71st percentile breakout age, 19.7, telling us, what is the age for, Jayden Higgins when he first posted a dominator rating over 20%. Those are all metrics that we're looking at as big pluses in Jayden Higgins' column, projecting at the next level.
One of the things I like to look at is the reception perception profile that Matt Harmon does every year. He does the success by routes. And if you look at his, and it's available on X, you can go see it. He has well below average metrics, Kate, on slants, flats, comebacks, out routes, corner, 9-route, post route, dig route. The only 2 routes that he ran above an average NFL prospect are screen and curl routes. That's concerning for me. A lot of his success at Iowa State was basically settling down into soft zones and just catching the ball and trying to get upfield. But when he was matched up man-to-man trying to run an NFL route tree, the success was pretty rough. And I guess that's what has me so spooked here.
I think those are all fairly good reasons to be spooked. You mentioned like maybe Iowa's scheme got him open a little bit more than maybe his natural ability to separate necessarily does, especially when he's playing along that boundary. He did play the majority of his snaps out there on the boundary, 70.9%. Looking at some more advanced metrics, 90.5 PFF receiving grade that led all wide receivers in the FBS with at least 100 targets in the 2024 season. You're looking at that and saying, wow, that sounds pretty fantastic. Sign me up. Then you look at the yards after the catch per reception, 33rd in the FBS among that same cohort with 3.8 yards after the catch per reception. You look at that in comparison to like a Tez Johnson, who we haven't yet covered, coming out of Oregon, 7.4 yards after the catch per reception. Absolutely excellent. Jayden Higgins, in terms of yards per route run in that same cohort, ranked 11th, 2.66 yards per route run in 2024. Again, pretty great. Contested catch percentage, 58.3%. Great. He's really good in these contested catch situations because of his body control, because of his ball skills. But then again, Marcus, we have to ask the question, why is he so often in contested catch situations? Right?
Yes. Now, again, I understand that Higgins ran significantly faster, but I want you to compare and contrast Keon Coleman for me, who was picked at the top of the second round last year. Coleman was 6'3", 213, ran a 4.6, 140. So again, I'm conceding that Higgins is a better athlete. But one of the concerns that we had about Higgins is everything was contested, right? And he played a lot on the outside, just didn't create separation. His best stuff came from the slot or when he was in the middle of the field, but we just didn't know if he was going to be used that way in the NFL. And he wasn't. Like, that's just not the way the Bills used him. They used Khalil Shakir and their tight ends in the middle of the field. They played Coleman on the outside and had very, very middling success. How much different do you think Higgins is compared to Keon Coleman, who we saw go in round 2 last year?
I think those are, it's a very fair concern. And those were my big red flags when it came to Keon Coleman. Like, you can make the splash plays and the highlight reel catches, and that's great. It makes for a really fun highlight reel when you're scrolling YouTube. What it doesn't make for is a lot of consistency, and it doesn't entice your quarterback to necessarily throw you the football unless you have a quarterback that you've earned their trust, like very thoroughly over time. Those, especially like, let's say you are paired with a relatively young quarterback. Again, I think Jayden Higgins, his draft range feels a little bit wide to me right now. If he was paired with a younger quarterback, I think that could be fairly disastrous, because if he's not used as that power slot where he's going to be able to kind of create that mismatch against linebackers, if he's paired up on the outside and he's not able to create that separation, is a young quarterback or even just not a super good quarterback, are they going to be willing to throw you the football?
So I will say this, because it sounds like I'm dogging Jayden Higgins a ton, and I'm not. I just want to try to be open and honest about where some of my struggles are at. I think he's a pretty natural receiver. And that's where, if you compare him to some of the other bigger receivers that have come out over the last couple of years, like compare him to Quentin Johnston, who went round 1 to the Chargers. He's just such a more natural football player than what Johnston is. They're similar athletes, but I just have a lot more faith that Higgins is going to be a productive NFL receiver than what Johnston was. We're talking about how do we figure out, or how do we find him the best situation so that he can be relevant for us in Dynasty. I think it's in the big slot, and it's going to be a little bit harder for him to find that landing spot. But I think if he does, he can be a really productive receiver. Another guy, or another comp that I threw out for him, was somebody like Kenny Golladay, like pre-injury Kenny Golladay, where I didn't think Golladay was all that flexible in the lower half of his body, but he's this big, fast, athletic receiver who had natural ball skills. And we saw Kenny Golladay have some really good seasons with the Lions, again, before he got injured.
Yeah. And again, all of this is sort of a testament to the wide range, because we've talked about the strengths. We talked about the, I think, upside for him, especially if you can get him into this volume role. But the landing spot is what's going to really set the floor, I think, for a player like Jayden Higgins. And that's what's going to make him one of the biggest wild cards, I think, in your dynasty rookie drafts.
Let's talk about his current dynasty value, and we'll talk about some potential landing spots for Jayden Higgins. We'll get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. I love how FanDuel makes betting so easy, whether it's picking my favorite team, the Lakers, or diving into player props, it's so easy to get started. From three-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many ways to bet on your favorite teams and player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. Nobody else is doing that. That's why FanDuel is the absolute best. Don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 bonus and $250 in bonus bets today. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Draft Show with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. Now that the season is over, get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every day, and find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. So, Kate, we've thrown around a lot of comps between Kenny Golladay, Keon Coleman. We've talked about Allen Robinson. So we're talking about that kind of archetype of player. But where is his current dynasty value as we stand right now?
As we stand right now in this very moment, I guess not this very moment, back in March, Dynasty ADP for rookie drafts, Jayden Higgins was the wide receiver 8 off the board. So for context, some of the players drafted ahead of him: Tetairoa McMillan, Emeka Egbuka, Luther Burden, Matthew Golden, Travis Hunter, Trey Harris, Alec Ayo. Say it for me.
Yep. It's Alec Ayo, I believe is how you actually say it. But
Okay.
I struggle with that one as well. Yep.
Whew. So
Ayo
these are the receivers going ahead of him. And I do think that this, it feels like a fairly easy spot to slate him into when you consider, I think, the variability of his range of outcomes. But I'm not going to lie, when I'm looking at upside and I'm seeing Matthew Golden as wide receiver 4, I'm like,
Yeah. So right now in your in your rookie drafts that are happening in March and April, he's going, middle of second round. Honestly, I think he's going to be drafted higher than that because we've seen this rise in his consensus board ranking. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up being a first round pick by the time we get to the draft. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes in that same range as Keon Coleman did, pick 35. Maybe he's the guy the Browns get if they decide to pass on Travis Hunter. I just don't know if I'm willing to pay that price tag. If it's wide receiver 5 in this class, let's remove Travis Hunter. If he's behind McMillan, Bird, and Egbuka Golden as that next receiver, I think I'm probably opting for another position, running back, tight end, rather than taking Higgins there.
But are there certain landing spots that would change that for you?
Let's talk about
a couple of landing spots where he really, Travis Hunter aside, could reasonably be wide receiver 5. Where are the good landing spots for you?
One of my favorite things is you can go to Pro Football Focus and do their mock draft simulator. If you click on a player, you'll see his most frequent landing spot. And the last time I checked, the Packers were one of his most frequent landing spots, which is just gross. I'm all out. But I do think there are some situations. I'll give you one. The Raiders at 37 desperately need receiving help with Geno Smith. They only have Jacoby Myers. Could Jayden Higgins walk in and be the slot receiver with the Raiders and get a bunch of targets from Geno Smith? I don't think that's a bad landing spot at all.
I don't think that would be a bad landing spot. I do kind of wonder, just with the general usage of Brock Bowers in the offense and sort of how they're going to move him around the formation, how does that impact Jayden Higgins' usage? Basically, are they going to have 2 giant power slots? I don't know.
Okay, what about the Titans at 35? They've got Calvin Ridley, who plays on the outside. You pair him with Cam Ward, and he's their slot receiver moving forward.
I like that fit, actually.
Okay.
I do like that fit.
That one's better. What about the Jets at 42? They moved on from Devontae Adams. The only other receivers on the roster, like Malachi Corley. Could you see him being the slot receiver in New York?
I could picture that.
Okay. What about the Patriots at 38? This is my least favorite landing spot ever.
Well, I'm hoping personally that the Patriots walk away with Travis Hunter at 4. So
Yeah.
I'm hoping they're not going to be in the market for a wide receiver, let's say right around their second pick there. Um, but yeah, not as crazy as of a fit. I prefer the Travis Hunter fit personally.
Can I give you one more comp before we head out?
Please do. Because I do think I will say my comp for Jayden Higgins coming in was Allen Robinson 100%. And the good thing is that if you look at him and see shades of Allen Robinson, we've kind of seen the blueprint for how to utilize Allen Robinson, right? So like I think a similar usage pattern for Jayden Higgins could be beneficial, but give us one more before we head out.
What about something like Cortland Sutton? Now, I think Sutton was maybe a little bit more flexible in the lower body, but Sutton was, 6'3.5", 220-pound receiver that ran low 4.5s, who you maybe don't love as an X receiver, but he's somebody that you can move around and against certain teams and against certain defenses can be a very productive receiver. And Kate, I keep looking at the Broncos here at pick 51. They need a receiver. It doesn't seem like they're sold on Cortland Sutton long term. Could Jayden Higgins kind of fill in that role on a rookie deal?
That could be kind of intriguing. And I mean, you look at, generally speaking, like the ceiling for Cortland Sutton hasn't been nearly as high as we hoped. But when you consider the past 2 seasons, like for example, 2024, playing with a rookie quarterback, posted a 1,000 receiving yard season with 8 receiving touchdowns. Like playing, with Russell Wilson in 2023, 10 receiving touchdowns. Like I think the floor for a guy like Cortland Sutton has been generally underrated. And that could be something kind of similar to what you're looking for at Higgins, depending on the landing spot. But again, he is such a hard guy to project right now because of that question mark about landing spot, because I think where he lands is going to be super dependent on what kind of offensive scheme, how they're comfortable in using him. And I could see him getting into a situation where maybe the draft capital is favorable. We love a good first or second round wide receiver, but I could also picture a situation where, maybe he has that draft capital, but he's pigeonholed into a situation that isn't necessarily the best for his fantasy value long term.
Last thing before we go, and I should have mentioned this when we were talking about the scouting notes, but we were talking about McMillan, Tetero McMillan, and Jayden Higgins on the Locked On Cowboys podcast. So the night before that podcast, Kate, I decided to watch both players again and kind of just watch them back to back. And it was just so obvious, like how much more flexible and explosive the lower body is for McMillan. The testing numbers favor Higgins, but when you watch, and I'll give you a perfect example. Both of these guys will catch like a curl route or a stop route. And McMillan just gets up the field so much faster, and he's just so much looser. And it made me sour on Higgins a little bit. Maybe that's not fair to Jayden Higgins. And again, I'm telling you kind of my process here, but it was just so shocking to me how much more fluid McMillan is than Higgins, that maybe that's impacted me a little bit. So I think you're right. The landing spot's going to matter a lot. If he gets drafted by a team that sees him as an outside receiver that can beat one-on-one coverage, I'm going to be really concerned. But if he goes to a situation like the Titans where they project him more as a slot player, I think now we're talking about him becoming a big value in our fantasy league. So I'm not out on Jayden Higgins. I want to wait and see where he lands before I move him up anymore.
Yeah, I do think that generally speaking, anybody listening to this player profile or a player profile may think we're kind of out on Higgins, but I think the biggest takeaway here is just that he does have a lot of really exciting traits that could make him a high upside player at the next level. But there are more asterisks than you're going to find with, Jayden Higgins as opposed to a Tetero McMillan, which is why we're talking about him not as a top 5 receiver in this
more
class.
Of a second round pick in your rookie drafts. Yeah.
All right, that is it for today's show. We'd like to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube, download the podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Magdziuk. I'm at Marcus _Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.